Okay, good evening. I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education for the public hearing of the 2017-218 district budget. And people at home know this, but people that are here do not, but this is being televised. Suzette, would you please call the roll?
Yep. Ms. Emmons?
Here.
Ms. Curran?
Here.
Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Ustra?
Here.
Mrs. Justin?
Here.
Mrs. Sujecki?
Here.
Mr. Bailey?
Here.
Mr. Keller?
Here.
President Sikic?
Present. Before I turn it over to Mr. Cromie to present our budget, just wanted to say a couple of words. Number one, I wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to Mr. Cromie for the time that it takes to put a budget together. This district is of tremendous size, and to get all those numbers put together and have them all work out. Also would like to thank him for what he's done in the past. When our ship was listing a little bit, you helped to write it, and that goes for the whole district too, because everybody had to kind of tighten their belt when we were in dire straits. But through Dr. Lexman's leadership and yours, we are on a good course right now. I would like to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Make sure the microphone is in the right order. Tonight, we're going to talk, we'll go through the budget presentation as we have with our others, and we'll take questions from the board once the presentation is finished. One of the things we're going to try to focus on tonight, Marty has used this in the new teacher presentation, and then kind of as we're starting the school year, but really we're moving from crisis to creating. So crisis being where we were a year to 2 years ago, and creating being that we have funds to think about what does the future look like. So 2018-19 look like, and 2019-20 and so forth. And that, there we go. Simply our mission statement. The West Dallas West Milwaukee School District develops inquiry-driven, independent learners through instruction that is personalized and engaging, with a focus on college career readiness and 21st century skill development. So simply just our mission statement. Our administrative staff is Dr. Lexman is our superintendent, Deidre Raymer, our director of leadership and learning, Beth Kaler is our director of communication and community relations, myself as the director of finance and operations, and Shelley Strasser is our director of recreation. Our supervisory staff are kind of our next level of administration. We have our manager of instructional services is Adam Hengel, our manager of student services Ann Locke, our manager of school services is Jeff Borland, manager of facilities and operations is Steve Rohde, manager of human resources is Mike Weaver, manager of technology from Tenuta, and I do have food service on here, Steve Kosner from Sodexo Food Service, and while we employ him as part of our contract for Sodexo, he really is one of our staff, and we treat him as such and really rely on his expertise in that, just like we would rely on any of the other employees listed on here or the previous page. A couple of really big budget timeline pieces. This past Friday was our third Friday count. We will not have preliminary numbers until Wednesday or Thursday of this week, just based on the new software and trying to run what a third Friday count will look like, but it was last Friday. October 1st, we get the property value from the state of Wisconsin, so we get a certified document that tells us what we should use as our property value. That goes towards setting our tax levy. On October 15th, the state is required to provide what our state aid is. That happens to fall on a Sunday this year, so that will be October 13th on the Friday. They will give us that amount. October 23rd, we'll have our budget adoption and tax levy adoption. And then by November 7th, we have to provide the municipalities of West Dallas, West Milwaukee, Greenfield, and New Berlin with our tax levy breakdown by municipality. This page simply just lists the board members. You already know who you are, and Suzette has called the roll, so we're good to go on that. The very first thing that we do when we're going to develop our budget is we develop a revenue limit computation. So I know you've seen a revenue limit sheet. Have one here. This is comes from the state. A couple of the things that are really key in knowing that is what was our base revenue last year. So that just comes from 16-17. We need to know our membership. So we use two memberships. We use the last 3 years, and we use the 3-year grouping before that. One helps us set where we should be. One helps us decide if we're in declining enrollment district, which As you can see here, we had 8,617 FTEs. That doesn't necessarily equate to bodies, because a 4K student, our full-day 4K is put in as a 0.6 FTE, so it's not necessarily body for body. But you can see for this year, we're anticipating that FTE count to be 8,457, so a reduction of about 160 students in FTE quantity. Then what we do is we multiply that by our per pupil rate, which is $9,979.33. Gives us a new value. We get what's called a hold harmless amount. This hold harmless amount of $1,596,701 is the difference between last year's revenue and this year's revenue when we use our per pupil amount. The state of Wisconsin says, as you're a declining enrollment district, we don't want you to necessarily have less dollars than you would have had the year before, given the same constraints of the per pupil amount. So they give you a hold harmless amount to make that gap. Now it'll change from year to year, because next year it won't be 8,617. We'll have a new membership, and that'll be based on third Friday count this year. So that hold harmless amount will just adjust based on your 3-year enrollment averages for the previous 3 years, and then the previous 3 years minus last year before that. We also get a declining enrollment exemption that goes right along with that. Declining enrollment exemption is based specifically on your actual declining enrollment over the past 3 years, and it's related directly to that. So again, that'll fluctuate up and down based on what our 3-year rolling average is. So the revenue limit that we're working with is $87,589,615. That'll adjust slightly just based on third Friday count until we have that number in, which is 2 weeks from last Friday, so the 29th. We're going off of the assumption of 8,457. And that number came from reviewing what enrollments we've had through Jeff Borland. He updates us weekly on that. One precursor, I guess, to this is all of these numbers were developed near the middle to end of August as required to get our budget published in the newspaper. So these numbers came from enrollments probably somewhere around August 16th to August 20th. So they're not necessarily up to date as of third Friday, or certainly of today. So we'll have some adjustments in that. The next key piece then of that $87 million is we have to determine what is our estimated general aid amount. So we get, from the state of Wisconsin, DPI, we get July 1, we get an aid estimate. So I use that amount typically. Now this year I took $1 million off of that. It goes back to our OPEB settlement coming in December. Because that additional revenue came in, the state of Wisconsin is going to view that as revenue, unbudgeted revenue more than we anticipated, and we're going to lose state aid because of that, kind of the teeter-totter effect. They're going to take some state aid away, so property tax has to make up the other value of that. So I've already estimated that the $7 million of additional revenue through OPEB is going to cost us about $1 million in state aid. So our actual state aid as of July 1 was $49,545,459, but I know that that $7 million OPEB settlement is going to take a chunk of that, so I estimated about $1 million of that. Next, I take a look at our operating tax levy. That's Fund 10, Fund 38, and Fund 41, and computer aid. Now, we do not use Fund 41 whatsoever. It is part of a capital building projects. But those are non-referendum capital building projects different than what we're using. They're set aside based on a 10-year capital improvement plan, and that we don't have. We run a 5-year capital improvement plan. We have not asked the board for a resolution to operate a Fund 41, so we simply just do not have that. But we do have Fund 38, which is non-referendum debt. So if we think about the CIP borrowings we've done for the last few years, we've had a couple of other ones prior to my term here that fall under Fund 38. And certainly Fund 10 is just our everyday general operating budget. So right now we're anticipating that levy to be $38,044,156. Our Fund 39 and our Fund 80 and property tax chargeback. So Fund 39 is referendum debt. So right now, when this was developed, we were anticipating about $360,000 from our 2003 referendum borrowing, about $1.5 million or $1.55 million related to the Act 32 borrowing, and $3 million for Fund 80. I've been working on holding off the Act 32 borrowing as long as possible because there's no sense in paying interest when we don't have any bills to pay as of yet. We're still in the designing phase. We will have to pull that money out near the end of October as required by the state trust fund loan. I was in contact with them very recently. Just based on when we're looking to draw down the money, we will not have a debt payment related to that in Fund 39 for the 17-18 school year. Our first payment will come in the 18-19 school year. That includes interest and principal. So we can assume that this $4,751,000 is going to drop by about $1.55 million and be somewhere around $3.2 to $3.3 million. Our computer levy, or our computer aid is taken out of that. That's $217,000. That's a computation provided by the state just based on the property values of the district. We don't do anything for that. It's simply just an addition that's provided to us. Property tax chargeback. Those are for municipalities who are not able to collect property taxes from an individual or individuals or businesses. They apportion that out and they send us a bill for that, so we pay that back because we collect it every year. And then the state certifies us the ability to collect that over and above our revenue limit because it was revenue that we were to have received but had to pay back. So typically for us it's anywhere from like $2,000 to $3,000. It can go up to $15,000 to $20,000 or be as low as a couple $100. But again, it's a number just provided to us from the state, certified from them. So our total tax levy this year looks to be about $42,577,895. Again, that's without the Act 30, or that's with the Act 32 borrowing, for a mill rate of $9.97. When I take a look at taking that $1.55 million out of it, obviously it would be about $41 million and probably somewhere around $9.75 for a mill rate, which would be very consistent this year. I believe we were at $9.76, and the previous 2 years before that we're at $9.79. So hovering right around the same value for a property tax and property tax mill rate. So you can see our revenue limit. Again, we have trended up since 2011-12. That's when the state took about $551 per pupil through the Act 10 borrowing. A lot of that, the reason the revenue limit went up is because for a good period of time we were still a growing district. Once we reviewed our resident pupil policy, we realized that we had some individuals here that were not necessarily residents of the district, and so we've worked really hard to clean that up. Jeff is continuing that work, and at this point in time, and really for about the last year and a half, we believe we have that as accurately as we're possibly going to be able to count that. So numbers moving forward, those are what we're using for our projections, and we feel very confident on those. Equalization aid and tax levy trends. So the dark blue bar is simply what we receive in state aid. The lighter green bar is what we receive in property tax levy. You can see for a while there, up until about 12-13, we were fairly even, and since that time, the state has taken over quite a bit of that. As you know, with Act 10, part of that was reducing property tax for our constituents in the state of Wisconsin, so pumping more dollars through equalization aid. And even in the last couple of years, we've had some additions to the per pupil categorical aid to offset property tax, and we've had some additions to the general levy, but that hasn't added to our revenue limit. It hasn't added to our per pupil number. It's simply been there to help reduce property taxes. So that's why that's starting to be a widening gap, more heavy in favor of state aid. Our tax levy rate comparison over the last 10 years shows us being relatively flat over the past 4 years. But we range anywhere from about $8.25 up to about $10.25. And again, we've hovered the last few years around $9.79 to $9.76 in reducing the Act 10 borrowing this year in order to just not pay interest on it. We'll be right around that same amount this year, so although our borrow is close to $10 here, we would anticipate that to be about $9.75 or so.
Andy, you said Act 10, do you mean Act 32?
I'm sorry, yes, Act 32, thank you. So our Fund 10 and Fund 27, we're going to focus the most on those. Those are our general operating funds. They get our kids in the building, they teach our kids, they bus them, pay for the lights, they do all the things to operate a school on a day-to-day basis. Fund 27 just has a requirement that it's for students of special education only. So anything purchased out of special education is only used on special education students for their programs and needs. Fund 10, that's for every student. So there are a lot of expenses in Fund 10 that also cover our special education students, but we use them for all students, so we charge them to Fund 10. And again, Fund 27 is simply our special education students. Inside of this, although we're not going to have any revenue or any expenses in the budget, is Fund 21 is considered in there. Fund 21 is essentially gifts that are provided to the district, and we use those really at the board's discretion, although typically whatever is being donated we use for the purpose that it was being donated for. It's been a pretty past practice of the board. We simply don't budget any revenues or expenses in it because they are gifts, and so we don't know if they're coming in, and we don't know how to expense it going out because it's going to change based on the need. One of the key things, though, that we always work to make sure is happening in there is that revenues always outpace expenses. We don't want to cover that with the Fund 10 expense, but we will let clubs cover that. So, for instance, if there was a donation to Central Football, that wasn't quite enough, but the Central Booster Club wanted to fund the rest of that, we would be more than happy to accept that donation to cover the cost. So our Fund 10 and Fund 27 revenues look like this if we split it up into a pie chart. 75% of our revenue comes from equalization aid and property taxes, the vast majority of it. The second highest piece, and I really consider these two together because they encompass the revenue limit. And when I think about the revenue limit, in broad scale, it doesn't matter if it's property tax or state aid, that's my base kind of revenue. Open enrollment comes in next on a single item at $8,960,000. Our state aid is made up of several things. So we get categorical aid out of this. We get our computer aid. We get a high poverty district aid. So it's grouped from about 10 to 12 different things. So total, it's about $10.2 million. Federal aid, off to the left-hand side here. This is things like Title I, IDEA flow-through. So anything that comes from the federal government specifically. As you know, the Trump administration has decreased aid through the federal government, so we're looking to take about a 4% reduction in our Title I funds and our IDEA funds. Those are, that 4% reduction is already discussed in here as part of the number. Local revenue, these are things like fees to the basketball game and student fees and fines, things that are collected from the students. We also have facility rentals in there. So for instance, we rent out the second floor to the Department of Workforce Development. That's considered a local revenue because that's taken on by us. Other, that is miscellaneous items. So E-rate is one. E-rate is government reimbursement for telecommunications. So that falls into there. Technically, our OPEB settlement fell into there last year as kind of a miscellaneous other type of revenue. But the really things that aren't expected are not budgeted for. Holistically, we do put a budget amount in there, obviously about $215,000, but to break it out on an individual item, I don't do that. Simply because I don't know what they are, but when I take a look back at the last 5 years, we hover somewhere around $215,000, $220,000. So I just know that those things break out and come in here. One of the pieces that's not in here that we've heard a lot about lately with the state budget is the categorical aid addition that is supposed to be coming. I believe it was the Senate passed it at $200 per student. The legislature will be taking it up, or the Assembly will be taking it up, and then Governor Walker will have his chance to take a look at it. That is not in here at all. We have not accounted for that, and this portion is up until middle of August. That was still kind of an up-in-the-air piece related to the whole state budget. One of the things that we'll have to determine is where does that revenue go? I know Dr. Lexman has some thoughts behind it, and Pat and Heather, as part of the business services team, we have some thoughts around where that would go as well. And we can talk about those, but it's not in here. I can almost rest assured and feel really confident in saying I feel really confident at $150 for sure per student, but it could be as high as the $200 this year and $204 next year. The other piece that we will not get to, there's a component in the budget for school districts that have revenue limit per pupil amounts under $9,800. Ours is stated at the beginning as $9,979, so we will not hit that piece, so that's not a revenue that we're going to consider or an adjustment that we're going to have to worry about in the near future. But should that go up, say in the next 4 to 5 years, past the $9,979 mark, that would be an additional piece of revenue that we'd have to consider a need for. I just have it broken down so you can see what our 2016-17 unaudited numbers come by. The reason I say they're unaudited, although we've gone through our full audit and almost everything has been verified by our auditor, they have not signed off on it, so until they sign off on it, it's considered unaudited. Those are due by December 1st or 2nd. I cannot recall exactly when. I know it's right at the beginning of December. So we use an unaudited versus our projected numbers. So you can see our equalization is going to be down a little bit, and again, that's due to our receiving our OPEB settlement in December, and that just going against the revenue calculation. Property taxes, therefore, are going to go up about the equal amount because those are the balancing act that we use. Our open enrollment amount is going to go up slightly, very slightly. Our state aid is going to be right around the same. Our federal aid is going to go down a little bit. Again, we're projecting about 4%, just based on the administration. Our local revenue is going to be down a little bit. And other, just in general, is going to go down over what our unaudited is. And again, that is because of the $7 million or $7.3 million we received in OPEB settlement. We simply do not calculate that. The other piece I don't calculate in the other is the sale of this facility. So everything is still on track. We're still set for somewhere around the middle of November to sign off and pass over ownership. But again, until that's signed and done, I don't want to count that as part of our revenue and have to figure out how we're going to handle that piece. I guess I'm a little more conservative in that method rather than count the eggs before they're hatched. I'd rather have them in-house and then figure out what to do with them. For our expenditures, just a couple of things that we've put into place here. We've given a 1.2%, I should start off with our licensed educators, meaning teachers. Right now, we're still finalizing negotiations this year, but we're targeting a 1.26% base wage increase. Administrative increase at 1.26%, 1.26% for all other employees. We have used CPI for the last 3 years, just holistically among all of our groups, regardless of what category they're in. So we're just continuing that. WRS, the employer contribution will fall from 6.8% to 6.7%. That runs on a calendar year, so that will not take effect until January 1. We are anticipating a 6% health increase, again, January 1. Right now, if we were to go out and bid, we'd probably see somewhere around a 15% increase because we've had a pretty high couple of years compared to our premium. So we're taking the 6%. We think it's a really good deal. Next summer, our anticipation is to go out to bid, assuming the WA Trust does not come back with what our consultant would consider a very favorable bid. But one of the things that we know when putting in a wellness center is that we see an uptick in health insurance costs because people are becoming more aware of what may be going on. And you tend to see more doctor visits in the first 6 to 8 months after a wellness center is open simply because people are more aware of the situations they're going through. So we're anticipating that, and that's okay, because in the long run, our goal is to have a healthier population, and so we need to make sure that we're helping them through that, myself included, through any of those things that they may or may not be going through. We want to make sure we get them taken care of and on the right track. So perfectly fine seeing that uptick in our health increase. I certainly wouldn't want to see that next year, but this year is completely reasonable. One of the things that we've done this year is we've maintained our department and building level funding. So if you know the last couple of years, we've done a budget decrease or a budget cut to help stabilize the budget. This year we did not do that. In April, May, and June, we went through a whole series of budget cuts, and those were kind of reduced right off the bat, so we've maintained those. We've added a human resource manager, Mike Weaver. We did reduce middle school athletics. Those are now in Fund 80 in our recreation program. And we reduced busing through moving Horace Mann to 8:30, 3:30 to be consistent with the other elementaries, and we have tiered at 3 schools. That's West Dallas Central, Lane, and Frank Lloyd Wright. Each have a tiered bus, Central in the morning, and then Frank Lloyd Wright and Lane happen to be in the afternoon. So our expenses as a pie chart really show us that about 74% of our expenses are people. The people that fill our classrooms, the people that clean our classrooms, the people that help maintain our buildings and help run the district office are about 74%. Purchase services, these are items where we are paying someone to do something for us. Sometimes it's buying a computer program like NWA, the MAPS testing. It's people coming into the building. that are servicing some of the things that our own maintenance team can't, or we simply don't have the capacity to do. It's our open enrollment out. So the students that are leaving our district, but our residents, all fit into that purchase service. Non-capital objects, these are anything from papers and pencils to the microphone. A computer is considered a non-capital object. The reason so, we use a $5,000 threshold. That $5,000 threshold comes from the federal government that they use for grants such as Title I and IDEA. And in order to just be consistent with those grants, we've moved to be consistent through our practice just globally within the district. Capital objects, these are things that we anticipate being here for a long time. They're taking up about 2% of our budget. And other, so other are things like liability insurance and workers' compensation insurance. They're fees for us to be a member of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. So those are things that kind of fit into the other category. When we break it down into Fund 10 and Fund 27, you can just see the difference in the salaries and benefits and purchase services. Just in relation to that, in Fund 27, if you take a look at capital objects, they typically don't buy very many capital objects in Fund 27 whatsoever. We typically don't have a need for that. Some of the things that might come out of that is maybe like an audiology speaker. Those are typically pretty expensive. We would put that into a capital projects. There are times where we have to build out a room, some sort of room or some sort of different area that might have kind of more of the textiles and more of the sensory type of things that a special education student might need. So that might fall into a capital objects project to build that out. But they typically just don't have very many. And they really don't have other objects because all of those fall into general operating budget for all students. But you can see our total revenue is $110,060,000 for, I'm sorry, expenditures and $428. A comparison of this year to last year, our salaries and benefits are pretty much right on track. Our purchase services, again, that's going up a little bit. We're anticipating a few more open enrolled students out. We're anticipating a higher cost of the voucher program this year. We know that that's going to continue to go up for the foreseeable future until, I think it's 8 more years where it's opened wide up. So those are the main increases in the purchase services. Non-capital objects is relatively the same. Capital objects has an uptick in cost. This is coming directly from our departments and the things that they're purchasing. We really don't have a district budget on the capital objects, but the individual departments or buildings, they mostly set our capital objects budget. Other has gone up slightly. And our overall from last year to this year is up about $1.5 million just in general. Next thing we're going to talk about is our debt service. So this is Fund 38 and Fund 39. So Fund 38 is non-referendum debt. Fund 39 is referendum debt. For Fund 38, right now, on the budget today, we've projected a tax levy of $2,473,778. That would cover our Fund 38 tax payments for next year. Our expenditures broken out in principal and interest are $2,492,554. So in order to calculate your tax levy and your expenditures, tax levy is based on what you would pay in calendar year 2018. Expenditures are based on what you have to pay during the 17-18 school year. So they really fall on 2 different calendars, therefore 2 different amounts. But we do have a reserve in there that covers the cost of that. Our Fund 39 projected revenues, again, this has Act 32 in it for $1,550,000. But our projected revenues were $1,934,000, and you can see our principal and interest were broken off to the side. Again, it's calculated the very same way. Revenues are calculated based on 2018. Expenditures are based on the 2017-18 school year, so July 1 through June 30th. You'll notice quite a bit of difference in expenditures and revenues here. 2 years ago, if you recall, we had levied an extra $630,000 to help defer the cost of the final year payment in Fund 39. So we have that sitting in reserve. That'll be used and applied towards our expenditure payment to cover the shortfall. But again, we're not projecting the $1.55 million of Act 32, so we're projecting this to be somewhere around $380,000 when all is said and done for the principal and interest payments in Fund 39. Fund 49 is our capital improvements projects fund. So these are things that we have, as a board, approve under our 5-year capital improvement plan. And this year, we approved $3 million. We also approved a loan in the amount of $3 million. But as you can see, what we're projecting is $0 in revenues here. In consultation with Pat and Heather at our Business Services Committee meeting, we are proposing not taking out that $3 million of loans. And we have already transferred the funds in 16-17 to cover the cost of CIP for this year. $3 million in full. So talking about moving from crisis to creating, we just created a $500,000, should the board give a thumbs up, I guess, to this today, but a $500,000 savings in operating costs over the next 10 years because we won't be paying about $50,000 in interest on that $3 million. To do that, as you can see in the expenditures column, we're still full go ahead with all of the expenditures inside of that $3 million. But one of the reasons that in Pat and Heather, when we talked about it, was that $500,000 comes directly out of classrooms. And so to take out that $3 million and borrow against it, we're just borrowing from our operating costs and not allowing that $500,000 to be used for something directly classroom related. And so our thought was to, if we can pay for it out of last year and still have a really good year, let's do that. Let's get ahead of the game and start being proactive in our finances and start really steering the ship in the right direction, which we think is a move to do that. So this will be one where I'm kind of looking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down for the board if we should move forward with it, because it's something we certainly can go back into 16-17 in reverse. It simply takes a journal entry and a call to the auditor, and everything is taken care of. Our projected fund balance, again, this is moving that $3 million in there, would be $4.4 million. Taking the $3 million out, we still have around $1.4 million to use in capital projects. So we're not emptying that out every year. And I know when Steve presented back in May, we still do a great deal of projects in-house, and that saves us money. So we typically bid out all of our projects because that's what we should do. We should plan for the worst. So we bid them all out, but there's a good number of things that we can do in-house. And we tried to do that as much as possible, and I cannot remember offhand how many projects Steve said we added, but I know it was somewhere around 35 additional projects that we took in, and we still were saving money last year under $3 million. So while I anticipate spending the full $3 million this year, our goal is to do that, but we're trying to get as many projects as we can, do as many as we can in-house, and turn that $3 million into, say, $3.4 million of actual supplies for us out of $3 million. Fund 50 is food service. It is required by us to calculate this separately. As you know, well, I'll get to the CIP, I guess. Our local sources, this is simply the amount of money that students and adults pay for our lunch service and our breakfast service. Most of our funds come from our federal reimbursement under the Federal Food Service Program, and we do get a little bit of state aid back. We're calculating $4,332,000 of revenue. Expenditures, salaries, wages, we only have one actual employee who comes out of Fund 50, that's our district nutritionist. Most of the salaries and benefits would fall through Sodexo, that's a contracted service, so you can see under purchase services, the vast majority of this, at about $4 million. All of that is paid through them. So all of the workers that are taking money at the cash register or handing out food or preparing food, that's all paid through a contract through Sodexo. So that's the vast majority of our purchase services. Non-capital objects and capital objects, we typically replace some equipment every year. We certainly have lots of non-capital supplies for paper and all the things that might go into trying to see if a student is free and reduced or trying to just run the program in general. So additional food that we might purchase. But in any case, our expenditures are about $4.35 million. We have a beginning fund balance of $1.95 million. You can see after revenues and expenses, we anticipate being at about $1.926 million. As you know, this year DPI supplied us with a preliminary notice that our fund balance in food service is too high. We typically don't want it to be about past 1/3 of our operating expense. One of the things that I tried to apply for this year was a deferment of our federal requirement to raise our food service prices. We did not meet that because our threshold of fund balance was not high enough. So it's too high, but not high enough to meet a requirement to reduce or to keep our food service flat. So one of the things that I'm certainly considering for next year is moving district-wide CEP. Because I know that we will not break even on that. It's probably going to reduce us somewhere around $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Now, that CEP project only runs for 4 years, so I certainly wouldn't anticipate running it for 25 years and running food service down to a negative fund balance. But the option to reduce it through that method, I think, seems logical. We have a large need for it. We also have a student population that would love free breakfast and free lunch. So it's one of the things that I would certainly consider. I know that we're also running short on freezer space in the district, so the potential to build on freezers, exterior freezers to a district facility costs anywhere from about $50,000 to $75,000. So the potential to build a few of those at some sites that are really pushing the need for freezer space. Those are typically our sites where we're preparing food. So the high schools, intermediates are typically our preparing sites, and we deliver out to our elementary facilities. So the potential to do that as well to help reduce that cost. As I mentioned before, we were not granted a waiver of the federal government requirement to raise our food service prices, so we approved in June to raise them by 10 cents at every level. So elementary to $2.35, middle to $2.50, and high school to $2.65. The federal threshold right now is, I believe, $2.90. So until we reach that, we're required to continue using the calculator at a year in and year out basis unless we are granted a waiver. As I mentioned also, we are in the community eligibility program. This is where students receive free breakfast and free lunch. As you know, we lost Lincoln Intermediate simply because Lincoln Intermediate in its existence does not exist anymore. It became the Learning Center. So the Learning Center was already receiving the CEP program. We added Wilson this year, so we're still at 9 schools. But as I mentioned, it's a potential way to help us manage that fund balance and get it to the level that it needs to be, is to take a look at what does district-wide look like next year. Or even just adding another group of buildings that are going to help us start moving into that fund balance. I have heard from some constituents about using our Fund 50 to help with our operating budget, so I just want to make it very clear that DPI does not allow that. The only transfer to Fund 50 that DPI allows is one from Fund 10 to Fund 50, not a reverse transfer of funds from Fund 50 to Fund 10. So it has to run totally separate. If it runs in the red, we have to cover that with operational cost. Fund 80 is community service, so this is our recreation department. It is used to record things that the entire community or subsection of the community has access to. So we can't kind of arbitrarily say, well, recreation plays a game a week on in the Central Fieldhouse, so let's use recreation funds to fix the Central Fieldhouse floor. We can't do that. It's kind of an all or nothing proposition, and that changed 3 years ago. It used to be you could apportion that. So if we could figure out exactly how much recreation played on the central floor, we used to be able to come up with a split cost of that. They do not allow it anymore. It's an all or nothing. Either it's all used by recreation or it's all paid out of Fund 10. We're in that piece. So our revenues, we're looking at local fees. So those are simply what people are paying for classes and for activities, of about $815,000. Taxes of about $3 million. The last couple of years, we've actually raised that to $3,110,000. That $110,000, an additional tax levy, was to cover the cost of the lease for the first floor facility. What we've realized over the last couple of years is that we don't need to recoup that funds. We're doing very well in Fund 80, so keeping our tax levy at $3 million, I moved it back. You can see salaries and wages and benefits there at about $3 million again. About 75%, very typical of our school district. Purchase services are the next highest, non-capital objects. Capital objects and other total about $3.925 million. Their fund balance, though, as we can see here, is very good. And so we need to find a way to make that a little bit more moderate. Right now it's at about 2 times or 1.8 times operating expense, and so that's pretty high. So we need to figure out a way to reduce that. So our projected tax levy again, going back to our revenue limit calculation, was $42,577,895. Again, I anticipate taking $1.55 million off of that and making that at about $41 million and some change. And again, then that would produce, a tax levy rate on the bottom here of 9.74. So I just want to make sure I hit that first. You can see the breakdown between Fund 10, Fund 38, our chargebacks, our Fund 39 levies, where we'll see that Act 32 reduction, and Fund 80. Our decrease in Fund 10 is simply about $110,000 from last year. We have an increase in Fund 38 levy. That just follows our debt payment schedule as required by DPI. Our tax levy chargeback last year was about $22,000. This year is somewhere around $700. So that's where that fluctuation comes from. Again, that's just provided to us from the state. An increase in the Fund 39 levy fell all on our Act 32 borrowing. Assuming we take that away, we'll actually see a decrease of about $630,000 there, or about $830,000 there, and a decrease in our Fund 80 levy of $110,000. This just shows our tax levy comparison over the last 3 years and with our proposed tax levy. The reason this 2016-17 is actual is because we do not get audited on our revenue limit and our tax levy. That is guaranteed through the state with the October 1st property certification, October 15th general aid certification, and the board approval of a tax levy and subsequent tax levy payments supplied to the municipalities. So those are actual numbers based on last year and then the 2 previous years compared to our proposed amount. So that's what I have for the presentation on this. I'd love to hear some questions or feedback from our school board, and then I think Jeff has the next bullet item after that.
Questions or concerns or comments for Andy?
Well, I have a question. Andy, you mentioned a couple of different things where board needs to make a decision. You said something about making them tonight. I think this is just what we're doing right now, presentation portion. Those items will come back at a later time, right? Or do you
Well,
want
I'm kind of looking for a thumbs up to see if we should continue moving forward with it or not, because moving the CIP into 16-17 to pay for 17-18 requires some auditor changes and some DPI changes. So, again, I'm not looking for a formal thing, and if I get 5 thumbs up, and then we'll probably bring it back for some sort of formal action to make sure that we're close. But if we get 8 or 9 thumbs that tell us we're in the right direction, I probably wouldn't bring that on an individual item. I would move forward with that.
So that's capital improvements, $3 million that we're recommending from committee not be borrowed this year.
Not be borrowed this year and paid out of the surplus from last year.
No?
So, we emailed back and forth quite a bit today, Andy, to talk about this.
Sure.
And I just think it's important that we kind of enumerate what's going on here with what Pat just talked about regarding the CIP and paying for that out of basically our Fund 10 money that we saved from our 16-17 school year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first thing that we should talk about is how much money did we save in the 16-17 school year that gives us this $3 million that we can spend on the CIP for next year.
We did really good. We saved about $14 million in total. Now, 7.3 of that is our OPEB settlement. Fund 27 was about $1.5 million of that. And then it's about $4.3 million was from Fund 10. Now, it wasn't all expenses. We received $1.8 million in additional revenue, so about $2.5 million was saved in expenses. But it netted out to be about $14 million. Mm-hmm. So with our negative $2.1 million fund balance, that really pushed us to like 11.9, and right around $9 million if we pull that $3 million out to cover the CIP.
Okay, so be it $9 million in Fund 10 if we pay the CIP before the sale of this building, correct?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, so we had a really good year. We're in a really strong financial position. It's our highest fund balance in 5 years. I think since the 2013-14, the end of 2013-14 or 2012-13, so.
Okay. So what happens with so in the budget that we originally, had talked about and approved was a $500,000 payment for the
Right.
CIP for this coming year. Now, if we're not borrowing that money, presumably that payment would then be going
Yep, so
back
our
into
Fund 38 tax levy would be reduced. So if we go back to one of these beginning pages here, I don't know specifically which one it is, but when we talk about the revenue limit computation, if I look at line 2 here, these are all of the things that make one amount of that revenue limit computation. So they really work in teeter-totter, kind of like general aid and tax levy. So as Fund 38 requirements go up, our Fund 10 revenue goes down. As Fund 38, which that would be, falls, our Fund 10 revenue goes up. So that payment that we anticipated for this year's CIP would just be put back into Fund 10 as new revenue rather than as paying a Fund 38 expense. So that teeter-totter just plays off of itself.
So that would just make it to $9 million plus $500,000 that we would have in the fund.
Well, no, because that is based off of this year's revenue limit, so it would be calculated as of June 30th, 2018. So it would be additional revenue inside of this particular school year.
Okay.
That we would have to count that for. We could not go back and count that in 16-17.
Okay, all right. And so how does that affect the mill rate then? So so essentially, originally we were borrowing $15.8 million from the state for the Act 32 funding, as well as the $3 million, which was a budgeted loan expense.
Correct.
Together to $15.8 million. So how's that going to work then?
So the $3 million does not affect the levy mill rate one bit or the total tax levy one bit, because it's all part of this grouping of $38 million right here. So it's inside of the revenue limit, so anything we change inside of that does not affect the levy or the mill rate. Only these items that fall under number 3 right here would affect our mill rate. So whatever our Fund 39 debt is, so that's referendum debt or Act 32, our Fund 80 recreation or the tax levy chargeback would be the only thing to do that, to affect that tax levy. Now, the board could choose not to levy to the maximum under Fund 10. It's been a historical practice here to do that. I would advise to do that because it allows us to maximize our ability to operate our schools and provide for our students. But the board certainly could do that as an option to not max or tax to the maximum.
All right, so you mentioned a mill rate reduction. Well, actually, before I go there, so what other options were considered with this $3 million that we're looking to take out of? So that was talked about in committee, obviously, about this was the best choice. What other options were considered before we came to the conclusion?
Doing nothing, and just allowing the fund balance to be increased by $3 million and taking out the loan. Those are really the only two things that we talked about because we felt so strongly on the $3 million CIP that, to us, it made logical sense, and that was as far as we had gotten. In regards to paying out of the Fund 38, rather than, or say, not paying out of the Fund 38 and covering it out of Fund 10.
Okay. I mean, the reason I ask is because I know we've had a lot of conversations about, how much money we're going to save and how much money we need to spend and all the cutting that we've done recently in the district and how much we really wanted to keep as much money in Fund 10 as we could. And now we're basically saying, like, it's okay that we're taking $3 million out of that fund to fund the CIP when, earlier that was something that we really didn't want to do. So I think it's important to make it clear why now it's okay when before it wasn't.
Our logic really came out of there is because we did so well in 16-17, way higher than projected. And that did not have us cutting into any of the OPEB funds. So we had projected $180,000 net, not including the OPEB funds. So if we had come out at $7.48 million, I certainly would not have projected that because again, that would just perpetuate us into using the funds over that we hadn't before. But because we far outpaced that, exceedingly outpaced that, I thought it made logical sense to save that $500,000 over the next 10 years of operational costs, because we're certainly not going to generate that in interest holding that $3 million for 6 months, because it is paid out pretty relatively to the beginning of the year. And so I guess to me it made logical sense to talk that over with Pat and Heather, and they seem to think that cost made sense as well.
So having that extra $3 million in the fund balance isn't going to affect our bond rating as we move forward, so that's going to be re-looked at in the spring, right? So having $9 million versus $12 million or $11 million, whatever it would be, in change, that's not going to make a difference in our bond rating. That could affect many interest payments that we have to make later on.
I think it actually, the way that we're structuring, I think will actually improve our bond rating. So two things. One, we would not be increasing the debt by as much. So that's always a good thing. Typical to a person, the less debt you have ratio to revenue looks good. The second thing is they're going to take a look at how did we do 16-17, and they're going to show an $11 million swing in the whole piece, plus funding $3 million of capital improvements rather than borrowing it. Plus the sale of the facility, and the fact that we probably can reduce our short-term borrowing from $26 million to close to $0 next year, all of that is going to send that up dramatically. And actually we're hoping to, instead of do a rating call in the spring, get that set up in the next month or so. Now that just was a talk today, so I don't know if that'll actually materialize, but try to get that through what we've reported to DPI thus far, which has been backed up by our auditor, and get that going in the right direction as soon as we can, just because we feel so strongly about it. I talked to a couple board members just in passing tonight, and in relation to what I just said about the $26 million, our anticipation is to pay that off next June or July. In totality, work to get a $3 to $5 million line of credit through BMO Harris, who is our current primary banking relationship, and really use that $3 to $5 million line of credit as a safety net, so to speak. Ideally not have to pull anything out of it. One of the impacts of the budget that was unforeseen, the state budget, that was unforeseen is the change in how DPI plans to provide general aid payments. So typically we get a large general aid payment sometime around September. We get one in December. I think the next one might come in March or April, and then in like July we get another one. Or June, I should say, we get one, and then we get a small one in July. So we have these kind of big gaps between. They're moving to one payment a month for 10 months, starting September through June next year. So that's going to help us out tremendously to really get that gap from October to December, that gap from December to March. So our need to short-term borrow is going to be limited simply because revenue is going to be coming in at a more frequent state, a more reliable time frame. And so while the $26 million would have a debt payment in September simply because we'd be covering the time from April 1st through whenever we pay it back, it certainly wouldn't be about $540,000. And we wouldn't have a spring payment as well, being the spring of 2019. So it would assist in saving us probably next year about $700,000 in short-term debt and then eliminating it in 1920. So I think all those things in conjunction are really putting $500,000 in over 10 years, putting $700,000 to $1 million back into our operating budget really helps us, again, move from that kind of crisis mode where some of us went sleeping a few years ago to where are we going next? How are we either paying our staff better, or what programs can we bring in, or how can we improve our facilities? Maybe we can fund the CIP every year at $3 million until it's completely under control. And I don't know. I mean, we'd have to look at the projections for that, but it might allow us to do some of those things and really be our ship pointed in the right direction and then moving full steam ahead with it.
Now, with the return to a positive number in our Fund 10, would this change the policy that we have implemented of trying to save $1.5 million back to Fund 10 every year that we budget for?
I think it can fluctuate. I think we should still have a goal of $20 million to potentially a little bit more than that. I mean, I don't think we should move away from that goal. So I think that's an important piece, but does it need to be $1.5 million every year? If the building of this, if the sale of this building closes, we get $200 from the state, or even $150. We're going to be at the $17 to $18 million range after this year alone. So I wouldn't say 1.5, but I mean, even if you put it at $500,000 over 4 years to get to that kind of $20 million, I think is very reasonable. Again, putting more money back into the operating expenses of the district.
Right. I have more questions, but I want to give other people
I
opportunity.
was just going to do that. Heather, you had your hand up?
Well, I was just gonna, when we looked at the audit and we talked about the audit and how we anticipated 180,000. And we were like, if we make that, we'll be like pumped. And it was my first year on the board and I was like, oh my gosh. And then when we had the audit come back and it was like millions, it was like, holy cow. So that's a tribute to our schools and our administrators that they tightened the belt buckle and they really saved the money. You know, I mean, that's.
Yeah, I guess just to add to Heather, there's no doubt that there is buy-in from everybody. When we talk at principals' cabinet meetings with the administration, there's everybody, at least on the financial page, is always on the same page. Whether we're always at the same spot on that, we all know where we're pointed, and it had to be reduction really at all costs to get to where we are. And so now Marty and I have been talking to them about, no, we need to start, what do we need? What are some of the things that we need that maybe we haven't done as much as we should? Let's start getting that out there. Let's start getting those things and moving towards what would make it really great. New playground, maybe it's a new makerspace, I don't know. But giving the buildings some autonomy. One of the things that I also provided just in relation to that, I give the buildings their carryover amount. I know we've kind of put that on a hiatus over the last couple of years, so I just sent that out last week through our principal update, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. In any case, with kind of the note around January to February, we'll be able to figure out where we are this year. We'll start taking a look at what are those projects that the buildings would like, what are some things that we're thinking simply from a curricular standpoint or from a facility standpoint that we might have some funds to do within the year simply because we're running ahead of budget again. And not ahead of maybe like utilities budget where that might catch up to us, but where are we running ahead of budget? Where did we just not spend where we anticipated spending for whatever reason? And let's get those funds out there because we don't need to save that drastic amount every year. We want to stay on budget because our budget is going to be set up to have some already built-in savings into it. So if we expend all of our funds to what the budget says it would, we'd still have money in the reserve. So that's what we're targeting for.
Pat, you look like you
I
had
did.
kind of...
Two things. One is on the capital improvements borrowing of $3 million. And typically, before the last couple of years where building project needs have really escalated because of aging buildings, we were in the $1 to $1.5 million range of borrowing. Going to $3 million is really significant and uncomfortable for us as a board. So it's important to reduce that if we can, because that $3 million is directly impacting Fund 10, the general fund, and any of that interest. So anything we can do to lessen that to get more money back into the classroom is really important. Some of the things we have also kind of done a brainstorm on, and I'm sure Andy will allow that list to grow so that we can work on it as a board for what things we might use with some of the excess money if the need arises. I think you've been hearing in recent months that we're concerned about the classroom size being too large. And should that come down? Now, that's something that could really improve learning and be helpful, whether it's the teachers or directly to the student. And the other is that we've done quite a cutback on academic needs where students can get direct instruction and be helped. So should we restore? There's a couple schools that came up quite lean this fall, and we're kind of thinking that maybe it should be acted upon sooner than later. Since we had this discussion, which was about 3 weeks ago, you may have generated more with the beginning of the new school year. But those are the kinds of things we're looking at so that teachers and students really get the benefit if we have shortchanged too much.
There's another piece that I just want to add to this. There's a fund that DPI allows called Fund 46. Fund 46 is another capital improvements project fund. It does require two things. One, a board resolution to establish a Fund 46. It requires, the second requirement is a 10-year capital improvement plan. Now that 10-year capital improvement plan is a lot more fluid than, say, our 5-year capital improvement plan, because that one's built on kind of 1 year at a time, but these are what we project in the next 5 years. But one of the things that we also talked about in relation to this is we have a synthetic football field that typically has a lifespan of about 10 years. That's already 4 or 5 years old. We have a synthetic soccer field, again, with a typical lifespan of 10 years old. That's a couple of years old, about generating a Fund 46 and start funding that, so when those are due, we have enough funds to pay for that instead of just all of a sudden we have to come up with $1 million out of general operating funds. But then once it's updated, then funding that just on a yearly basis with an anticipation of replacing it in 10 years is just an extra thing to kind of, if we make it a yearly expense, it's not so big. If we wait until it's due, it's a holy cow, we have to come up with that amount of money. But it's kind of like it's utilities. You know, at home you budget utilities every month simply because you pay them. If you waited all year to pay them on December 31st and you got your utility bill, you'd be like, holy cow, where am I going to come up with $2,000, $3,000? But if I pay it every month, it's not as bad. Kind of a similar thought process to that just particular large ticket item. And there are certainly other things that we could add into Fund 46 that you might need. Roofs might be one. Or instead of that being a CIP project, it's just a $500,000 we fund every year and we pull our roofs out of there.
Anyone else? Otherwise, we'll go back to Noah. Is that a yes? No?
I had a little question, or just a point of clarification. You had indicated correctly that the $150 to $200 per pupil amount that we may be getting from the state is not.
Is not in there, correct.
Okay. So Do we have an idea of where that money would go then? I mean, would that be going back to the general fund, or what would the thought process be behind that?
So I know one of the big things that Marty has talked about is kind of right-sizing the salaries and benefits of the district personnel, not just the district office, but district-wide. So I presume once that study is done, which he's having worked on now, we'll take a portion of that. At the time when we originally talked about it, it was going to be potentially for CIP projects, and I know I brought that up at the board meeting, but based on what we're proposing now, that wouldn't necessarily need to be. I think it probably also lends itself to the next kind of thought process about what we're doing with our schools and how we're trying to get them to be more program-oriented, and I'm probably not saying the right word, but with Mitchell being a STEAM school and trying to get schools to self-identify with kind of a path and providing the funding to do that. And I guess setting up some kind of future schools fund, so to speak, to get that up and running and provide the buildings what they need, because we certainly don't want the buildings to absorb that cost, because some of them it's going to be more expensive than others just based on the nature of the kind of where they're going to head with it.
Yeah, so I'm jumping here. Andy's doing a great job explaining kind of where the vision is leading us, and we have a strategic plan that we want to make sure we continue to attend to and hit the goals there. But this idea of future schools, or these kind of unique learning academies, there's different language around them. I like the language future schools much better because I think it easily communicates kind of what we're hoping to accomplish for the community. So some investment there. I think some of the things that have already been mentioned about class size, we're running specials, really, especially in elementary schools. The specialist schedules are very tight. And this is the result of we've made really hard decisions that have put us in the position now where we can start to think, now what do we do with resources? So it's a great position to be in, but we've stressed the organization a bit. Some of what we've done, essentially the curriculum, what was the curriculum department is now, a couple people, and then the supplemental contracts. So we've got a whole bunch of teachers, administrators that have a full-time job and a little part-time job, right? So that adds stress and anxiety into the system too. It saves us a bunch of money. But I think we would look at some possible investments there, where we support the curriculum side of the house. But we'll come back with a more complete proposal as the final kind of budget numbers start to settle in a little bit. One of the things I've used over and over again is remind boards and the public as you work through a school budget that for months it's really written in jello. It changes so much as we come through, and between now and even October. It'll change quite a bit again, but we're in an enviable position, and I think I'm really proud of the work that we've done, of what the principals have done, and I think I'm going to ask the community to start being proud of the work we've done too, because we've come a long way.
I just want to reiterate something that Marty said, and the hard decisions that were made, and that really comes to the board, because ultimately we just get to present them to you, but you have to decide to make those. And so making them is a hard choice. You could have chosen not to and kind of see how the chips fell, so to speak. But you chose to make the hard decisions, and that's not always easy because the community comes and talks to you. So just thank you for that, because it helps calm my anxiety, my stress level, to know that there are some of those adjustments being made to help us. We don't have to find them in every nook and cranny.
Anyone else? Noah?
Two things left, I promise. One's really simple. So you mentioned about the food service, a balance, that you've got a warning that it was too high. So what happens if it remains too high? What do they do?
Well, this year we're going to have to come up with a formal plan. So last year we provided some thoughts about what we would do. It's good for the first year. This year will have to be a formal plan, so we'll have to come up with some declaration.
How much do we have to spend out of that account
What
to
we're
get?
going to do. They typically want it at about a third of operating expenses, so we need to get that down somewhere around $1.4 million. So about $500,000 has to come out. Now, it does not have to come out in 1 year.
Okay.
It's simply what is the plan to get you to that.
Okay.
Can I just jump in one second?
Certainly.
Now, would that plan be like Steve and you, or who would be involved in the food?
Yeah, I think, I guess it depends on what the plan is going to be. So for instance, if Steve really comes to us with a vast need for 10 of these so-called off-site freezer spaces, probably go ahead and do that. But if it's CIP, I want to bring that to the board and make sure the board feels comfortable with that, because that really is more of a long-term solution. That, like buying a ton of freezers now is, we could just buy that now and be done with it. But kind of thinking long-term with CEP, the Community Eligibility Program, also has just some long-lasting effects on our district, other than it being a 4-year contract that we signed with the state on top of that. So, yeah, but typically I check with Steve, what do we absolutely need? What can we reduce here? And then it's probably more at the director level with Marty, and just talking about where do we see it. Certainly applying for a waiver on lunch fees, if we don't go district-wide CEP, is, like, I'll keep putting that in because it just makes logical sense that we shouldn't have to raise prices if our fund balance is too high.
Didn't mean to cut you off, no, but I thought I
It's
might,
really-
I might forget before I get a chance to ask.
Sure. Well, I only have one more, but it's an important one regarding the mill rate. So you did mention that, so our original proposed mill rate was 9.97 per 1,000. And you said that because of the movement of not having to pay the first payment for the Act 32 funding in the spring would actually bring that mill rate back down to actually a little less than we were paying before. So could you just go over that just briefly? How does that work? Why is that working the way it is? And then moving forward now, because originally the first year was supposed to be the most amount for Act 32, and then after that it's supposed to cut down to about a third.
Yeah.
So can you just go through that quick, please?
Sure. So Act 32 falls into referendum borrowing. So it's completely set against the tax levy minus whatever operational savings we'll have. And so the state trust fund, after a certain date, which I think is September 1st, they do not require a payment in that fiscal year.
Okay.
So therefore, if we're going, and they only pay one time a year, they pay on March 15th of the year. So the payment that I had anticipated for March 15th of 2018 is not going to be necessary. So we're not going to need to pay that. So that's the reduction for this year.
Okay.
So our 10 years of payments would start on March 15th of 2019.
Okay.
We'll have an additional $350,000 or so, whatever we're levying this year, for our final payment falling off. That's where that reduction comes off of addition. So moving forward, minus the $185,000 would probably be at 1370, so somewhere around $1 million for the Act 32 borrowing, rather than what we looked at this year being close to $2 million with the whole 1.55 and the extra $350,000.
Okay.
So that's where that kind of change will come into place. Exactly how it will affect our mill rate, I can't necessarily say, because some of that just depends on how much general aid we get.
Sure.
But I would anticipate it to be in the ballpark of $9.85 to $9.89, somewhere about a 10-cent difference, give or take. So close to where we had anticipated it being.
But for this year, for this coming year, there's actually going to be a slight reduction.
Yeah, I would anticipate a reduction from, or close to the 975 we had last year, somewhere around there.
That was all that I had.
One more thing, let's go back to Fund 80.
Sure.
Because you had talked about the fact that it is kind of overfunded, and we have a desired fund balance that we want to keep, and our fund balance is higher. So, that is the Recreation Department, and have you some suggestions for what we can do to lower that so it does not impact our general fund as much? And one suggestion to throw out there is that as we lease 2 floors from this building for the next couple of years, the Rec Department still sits on the main floor, should occupy its own lease with its own funding. I don't know if it's doing that right now. If
It is
not,
doing
that
that.
would be the way to do it. And there may be other things too. So whatever can be done that is on the burden of the general fund 10, I would hope that we could do it in whatever way possible to get that money shifted so Fund 10 doesn't suffer.
Well, it's really important to note that we can't do that. We can't just fund shift.
I
So,
understand.
one of the things that we've talked about, and this was actually just recently, the softball field located at Survive Alive, or our 68th Street building, is the Central Bulldogs home softball field. We've talked about finding a separate location for that and making that property entirely rec. And because they've lost some programming through the Franklin Fieldhouse, we have some other Fund 27 programming there. With Parkway being leased to CISA 1, they've lost space. So we've talked about, well, what if we gave that field entirely to you, got the girls softball off it, which would then transfer it to Fund 80. Because right now, because the girls softball plays on there, it's Fund 10. But if we transferred that to Fund 80 and then built out at Survive Alive, to get a lot of the rec programming kind of centralized as much as possible, would be one use for that. Now, I don't know how much of that $5.7 million that would chew into, but it'd be a significant chunk to build out.
A lot of community activities, organizations really like using that facility. PTA, that was their main hub. The Survive Alive was their project, so it just makes sense. That's a given. And with the kitchen that's in there, activity rooms, it may have changed over. There's a second floor that occupies offices. It's just a great thought, and I hope you will pursue that.
So that was just a recent thought of what we could do to kind of chew into that. One of the reasons I didn't want to take the tax levy back down below $3 million was with the movement of intermediate athletics and them absorbing all the costs, including coaching and the busing and all that. I just don't know how that's going to fare into that. So I wanted to let that play out a year, see how that affects our expenses before maybe we potentially look at a tax levy reduction of Fund 39. Of Fund 80, because we simply just don't need it year. I mean, we're obviously proving that we're doing okay year in and year out. So, but I wanted to play that out and just make sure that we're not overextending, because I know one of the other pieces that came along with that, we did end up hiring another individual inside of Recreation to kind of manage that, because that entire schedule would have gotten thrown onto someone else's plate who just didn't have time for it. Like every other department here, they're stretched pretty tight as they can be. And so we did hire another individual who will help with some other duties as well, but they're going to be primarily that intermediate athletics. So I know we talked about it being about $175,000 to $180,000. Now we're probably looking at somewhere about $230,000 when you put a salary and benefits and all that extra additional person onto that cost. So again, just wanted to play it out, see how it is, and then we would take a look at addressing it next year. But I think the Survive Alive House is, when we talked about it, I think it was on Friday, was probably our best solution, or a really good solution. And it gives them the space they need, again, because we're taking it away to do other things. We leased the facility, or we're using it for some other just school programming that is necessary for us to have.
I was just gonna say, did you think about, where would you think about moving Central softball then? Would you think about redoing Franklin's Field where they practice, so it's closer to the school for the kids?
Really, it's up in the air at this point. We talked about a few places, potentially partnering with the Milwaukee County to use the grounds at, on 50th Street or 50th and Burnham, or where, I'm not exactly sure where that is, but 72nd Street has a softball. Shelley listed several places that she's going to look into that could potentially be used for that. We can certainly talk, Franklin was not mentioned, but we can certainly look into that.
Open field, there used to be 2 diamonds there, now there is 1.
Yeah, I mean, it makes logical sense to look into that.
Imagine how that would bring up that area.
Yeah. Noah?
Correct me if I'm wrong, was Survive Alive House the one that had the retaining wall that you
It
had
is.
replaced?
Yes.
So again, right now, that's a Fund 10 expense because
Right.
that sits around the diamond.
Right.
And that would transition
But
to
then
Fund 80.
then you could use Fund 80, Fund 82, because that was a big, question mark expense of how to replace that.
Yeah.
That was something I remember seeing on the list.
So I would say that that's an underlying additional kind of benefit
We're thinking down that path.
of moving that, is right, it just eliminates that from our CIP that we need for buildings.
Which could happen at any time, and then we're just stuck with, like what happened at Longfellow, it has to be repaired.
Correct. Right, yeah, you don't get to hold off on it if it needs to.
Right.
So in theory, is this a plan and a transition that could take place during this coming budget year?
Oh, certainly. Anytime we can find a house for Central Field, it's not like board would take formal action on it.
Okay.
We would simply be providing a new permanent home field for the Central Bulldogs. All of that now becomes recreation place, and then whenever we would build or whatever we would do, certainly that would come to the board because the board oversees recreation and the plans and stuff like that, but that would be a justifiable Fund 80 expense.
Perfect.
Sue?
As long as we're talking about the recreation department, is there a reason why we're continuing to have the recreation department occupy the first floor?
They hold a lease for that space, and so that lease is in effect. But really, there isn't space for their offices outside of that. Now, certainly, if we were to build at Survive Alive, we would try to build that in, presumably their office space there, but they have the funds to pay for the lease. It's pretty much similar to what we'll be paying for this if we close on, or if we settle a lease here, which we're looking to do, bring it to the board next week at some point to have a discussion about it. But they have the space down there, they're established there, so until we'd have something new to establish them to, I do not see a reason to move them.
Well, I understand that the Fund 80 is well-funded. I understand that, but it's still also funded by the community. And the community would be questioning why they would continue to rent space. The purpose of selling the building was to save money for the community. And the rec department historically was housed at the, if you're going to call it the Survive Alive, but it had been called the rec department office, that there wasn't a reason that it wouldn't have gone back to the rec department office. I understand they have the money, but the money could be spent differently and possibly more effectively.
Yeah, at this point in time, there's simply no space over there for them to move their offices back. We don't have space in the district for them to move their offices to a reasonable location where people could access it. So we certainly have some space at Hoover, but that's not reasonable for our community for the recreation office. Our recreation office needs to be on a bus line, centrally located, or towards the eastern portion of our district. So within those constraints, we just don't have space for them at this point in time. So our move is to keep leasing that space until we do have something that is feasible for them.
And I just have one more question, if you don't. The fund or the budget items that are other, that's the miscellaneous, I suspect that in that would be all of the different moving costs, being that we moved.
Those actually fall under purchase service because we have to hire someone to do that. But we really have not spent $20,000 maybe to move. We hired a moving company to help move for a day with the Learning Center. Technology, we've hired a company, but again, that's like a 2-man in a truck type of move, so it's not a drastic expense. Most of it's done in-house. Most of it's been done through our maintenance department, and our trucks this summer have done the vast majority of the moving.
I think our community will be very happy to hear that it hasn't been as costly as what they would have expected.
Yeah, the most costly thing, and really the major one, will be moving our servers. And that simply is because we're hiring a technology company to come do that, who then carries the liability should something happen to those, because those are expensive pieces of equipment, probably around $150,000 to $200,000 a piece. And then they do all the hookup too, so they get it all set and ready to go. That would probably be our biggest cost. In all honesty, probably never really should have been moved from 9333 because we have some really nice dedicated space in there that's clean, air conditioned, totally separate from that. And a server isn't something you check every day. You go check it once a week. They all have alarms, so when the alarm goes off, it's not, it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes over to the west to go check on it. So, and that alarms gives you typically a couple of hours of time to get to it before something would happen to it. So the need to move it to be close to us was never really necessary to begin with, but it is what it is, and so we're moving forward.
I'd like to see the rec department, because over the last several years, they've kind of jumped in and really helped out the district, and they're a shining light in our district, and, they don't need to be an afterthought, and I like your idea with the Survive Alive house and building on that, and if whatever funds that we can do to do that for the rec department. I mean, they carried the day for us quite a few times, so they deserve that, to have their own facility, I think.
Yep, I'd like to see them have a dedicated recreation facility, kind of all the amenities that go with a really nice recreation department.
Right, and that'll just help the community, and in that location, that would be, I think, something that the community probably would want, and can see putting a little extra money towards that and making that happen. From my point of view as a school board member, I want to say thanks. You've done a fantastic job. You've brought some amazing ideas over the year and a half that I've been here, and keep it coming. And as a parent, I want to say thanks as well, because I can just feel the vibe in the community, and it's changing. And it's a pretty cool thing, so keep it going.
And speaking of the community, it's that point of our meeting now where we'll open it up to questions or comments from our citizens. Just come on up if you give your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is it on? My name is Michelle Lorenz. I live at 1211 South 102nd Street. I'm a special education assistant at Irving Elementary School. I'm here to request an iPad and communication app for educational assistants who need one to assist in working every day with our special needs children with intellectual disabilities. Several of us have requested an iPad through the help desk. I have not received a response to my request from August 27th. Another assistant received a reply from the help desk saying she's not getting one. We were told to use the teacher's iPad or laptop. These are special needs teachers also. They are using both all day long. I don't understand why we as educational assistants who work with special needs students all day have to beg for resources to do our job. 3 years ago, our principal had to jump through hoops to get us iPads. He succeeded. We've had them for 3 years now, and this year we are told, no, we can't have them. In our school alone, we have 5 special needs classrooms. These nonverbal children in each classroom include 4 out of 5 students in one classroom. In another, there's 4 out of 6. In another, there's 8 out of 8. In another, there's 5 out of 8. And another, 4 out of 7. And one that's included in a mainstream classroom. Most of these children understand, but they are nonverbal. They can't express themselves, and that gets frustrating for them when they can't communicate. As you can see, as you can see, they get very frustrated with their needs that are not understood in a reasonable amount of time. They just have a different way of showing it. I carry my children's voices in my back pocket. This is what we do right now. Listen, sit, stand up, walk. Are you happy? Are you sad? Pick one. Are you scared? Yes or no? Pick one. Mad? On and on. Headache, if they're sick, whatever, that's what we do. And this is how we presently communicate with our students. In addition to working with children, we are required to enter Compass Care Medicaid billing information on each Medicaid eligible student, which is most of them. This is daily and mandatory. The computers in the library are old and take 5 minutes to load up before we can even start. This ends up being overtime at the end of the day that we cannot log because we are told by administration that we cannot log overtime. We are also required to complete mandatory online training. We do not get paid for this time also. It's easier and quicker and readily available on technology, which we've done it on the iPad in the past. We do not have time during the day to leave our students and go to the computer lab to complete the medical billing process, online training, or check our emails. I am nervous as heck up here, but somebody needs to listen and speak for these children who do not have a voice of themselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to address the board with comments or questions?
Erin Wayne, 2166 South 91st Street. One, I just have a comment, and it's really not budget related, I guess, but I keep hearing you talk about future schools and how you'd like to see each school be a specialty school. I'd like to tell you that that's what the community, the principals, the teachers were doing prior to the neighborhood schools. I think the fact that you passed that, spent a ton of money on that, lost students because of that, And now, not even a year later, you're talking about future schools and how they're all going to be specialties and each student is going to pick one. That's what was happening. Each school was going in their own direction. And you spent a ton of money backtracking that. And now that's your future goal. Just statement, want you to think about it. As far as the budget goes, I think the public is a little bit more interested in hearing things that we can relate to instead of funds. I mean, all of this makes sense. It's great. I love that you had the packet out there. I think generally the public wants to hear about how you cut things, like the taxis for the homeless kids. Has that money been cut, and what changes did you make to do that? Didn't bring my other notes, but similar things to that. If you could expand on some of the more detailed things in the budget that have been brought up at the meetings, instead of just what money is coming in from which fund and going. I understand that's your budget, but I think the public wants to know more specifics on things that you've cut and how you've done that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll turn it back to you for closing comments, but you still wanted to kind of get a feel for us on
Yep, I'm just looking for a feel on the CIP and how we want to handle that, so I can kind of figure it out moving forward and bring it back. So I know if paying out of last year seems reasonable, so I can figure out how to kind of just figure out and bring it back for next time. Okay. I have that. So I just want to say, one, again, crisis decreeing, we've done a really nice job. We're going to finish 16-17, although it's officially done, finalizing the numbers. It's somewhere around a $9 million in the positive fund balance in our Fund 10. That's a swing of $11 million. I think that's something we need to be really proud of. And while the vast majority of that was our OPEB settlement, it came in, and we needed it to help us turn our district around. The sale of this facility is just adding to that Fund 10 balance, and really the purpose behind selling it was we needed to bolster our Fund 10 balance, and we needed to get to a healthy place. And it's going to put us in a really healthy place come year end and really make our future a whole lot brighter. 18-19 looks really good. And I know we're in 17-18 now, but I'm already 2 to 3 years out. I kind of live in last year, the current year, and the future year, and then think about the second future year. So I'm constantly living out there to figure out what the plans are, and the future looks really bright for West Dallas, West Milwaukee from my financial standpoint. I know we spent a lot of time in the strategic plan trying to really bolster that last building block of financial stability, where we now need to start putting our focus on those first 3 building blocks, our students and our employees and our community, and figuring out how do we really sell all those things that are in there and make all of those things happen, because the financial piece, we did a great job taking care of. Again, it's not totally done, but it's right there on the cusp of being done, and then running it even from year in and year out. So just thank you for all the support from the board. I really appreciate that. I want to thank Marty for his support and kind of letting me just run with my ideas and try to figure out if they're feasible and how we can make them work. So.
Thank you. Sue?
I think all of us, we all want to say thank you to you. You know, I know that you've expressed that for all of the board, but it's true. When we take a look at this budget and where we were a couple of years ago, it looked pretty bleak. And thanks to you and all of your efforts, it's not as bleak. And I want to echo everybody else's comments.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
How much we appreciate it.
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Second.
We need any discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting stands adjourned.